Now we're joined by Dave Winston, CBS's resident expert on the GOP House races. Dave, we can start with this question, which is the ethics investigation into Maxine Waters and Charlie Rangel. As far as Republicans are concerned, would it be better or worse if there were a September trial for the two of them?
I guess I'm going to take a slightly different tact. I mean, for the Democrats, this is clearly uncomfortable. You could watch the congressman. He was not exactly excited to be on having to deal with those issues. But ultimately, for Republicans, whether it's a trial or not is not going to decide this election. What's going to decide things is the economy and the state of the economy and how the two parties sort of interact with each other as we go forward in this election. For Democrats, this is going to take up a lot of their time in terms of being on air, just like you did now. But ultimately, it is not the central part of what's going to occur this fall.
And how do Republicans feel going out into this August recess? We remember last August, it was a pretty good month for Republicans in terms of knocking the president's health care plan. There was a lot of ferment in the country. What's the feeling now?
Well, I mean, part of what you've seen, and this is what the minority leader, John Boehner, did in terms of all his members, basically said, here's some things that we're looking at. There's this effort being put together that he asked Kevin McCarthy of California to put together in terms of trying to begin to shape some sort of an agenda for Republicans to talk about in terms of the economy for the fall. Variety of ideas sort of emerged from that. He has sent members out to sort of go interact with their constituents to see which ones seem to sort of have the greatest weight. And then the plan here is sometime in September sort of rolling out, here's the agenda.
Here's what's confusing about that to me is the last president, George Bush, used to talk about a leader leads. And he would say, I don't care if these things are unpopular, both when he was talking about the war, but also privatization of Social Security. He used to, in fact, boast about the fact it was unpopular and he was going to push it up the hill. This seems to have the binoculars reversed. The ideas are not being put forward by the Republican legislators, but there's this kind of listening tour going on. Is that, I just want to get your reaction to that kind of reversal.
Well, a couple things. First off, part of putting together an agenda that can create a majority coalition based on certain principles that again, Minority Leader Boehner and Republicans represent, there are two elements. One, shaping that initial form of that agenda, and then two, going out and talking to people, finding out which pieces of that are most important to them so that you can most effectively lay out where it is you want to go. But ultimately, again, there's a relationship, particularly in the Congress, between constituents and members, right? Members who don't listen to their constituents aren't going to be members for very long. And I might add, one of the problems that President Obama is having at this point is there's this perception, particularly when it comes to health care, that he didn't listen to people, and that's one of the reasons why the Democratic Party. So there's always this dynamic tension between leading and understanding where the public wants to go, and to some degree making sure you're implementing what they want implemented.
There's, if you look at who's raised money in these competitive districts, these toss-up areas that we're all looking at, Democrats do have an advantage there. In an otherwise difficult landscape, they're looking pretty good on the money front. How much of a help do you think that will be? And do you think Republicans will be able to fix that by the time we get into this final stretch?
Okay, now I'm going to probably say something remarkably dissonant here in terms of what people might expect. Money is important to a point. But I think what we're beginning to see through the impact of internet, cable, network news, just the whole way people get their information, is that money gets you so far, but ultimately it's what you're talking about, what you're saying. And the challenge to both parties is for the political consultants of both parties who are so used to it being about money and being able to actually control message. You can't control message like you used to, and now you really have to think of different ways to do that. And I'll give you a good example. In Michigan, Pete Hoekstra just lost. But the other two candidates spent millions and millions of dollars while Pete Hoekstra barely spent anything, and he did an earned media strategy, and he was right there at the end in terms he actually finished ahead of one guy who spent $2 million more than him, and then the ultimate winner, Snyder, spent about 3 or 4, I think. But nonetheless, he was relatively close. That's an example of if you've got a message that resonates, and if you've got positions that matter, you can engage relatively well, but you need a certain level of infrastructure. But the idea that you need $30 million or these huge sums of money to run statewide in some of these big states, again, take a look at somebody like a Mike Huckabee. Did pretty well with that much money.
Right. Final question. I'm going to put you on the spot. Give me either the number of House seats or your range. I mean, what are we talking about, in a kind of best case for Republicans, and what's the worst case for Republicans?
Well, I think there is this interesting internal debate, and I don't mean to put you off, in terms of what sort of campaigns are going to be run. Are they going to be run on, here's what we're trying to accomplish, or are those campaigns going to be run based on defining your opponent and defining Obama and not having to put an agenda for it? My personal, if we actually put forth an agenda, there's an opportunity to pick up a majority. If we don't,
More than 39, then.
yeah, more than, well, there are a couple of Republican seats, so it'd have to be probably a little bit more than that, 42, 43, somewhere in that neighborhood. But if there's no agenda put forward and it's all about just trying to be a check to Obama, and it's all about Barack Obama, it's not where about Republicans want to go, then I think you're looking at a lower range. I mean, that could range anywhere from 20 to mid 30s, depending on the situation. But ultimately, because here's the problem that Republicans face, right? I have never seen a better opportunity for an opposition party to actually win majorities. The problem Republicans have is 2006 is not that long ago, and people remember that Republican Party. And one of the things that, again, Minority Leader Boehner said, we've got to earn back the trust of the people, and to some degree, it's that transition of people turning around looking at Republicans, but Republicans have to then say, why us? And get people to, so it is just not just about Obama. It's about why Republicans, given where we were in 2006, have learned from those errors, and in fact now are ready to govern.
One other last question,
Okay.
which is, say you're trying to turn this into an election that's a choice and not a referendum. That's the Democratic strategy, right? How do you do that? If you were to advise a candidate and say, how do you make this into a choice and not a referendum? Give me the three things you're supposed to do as a candidate.
Well, no. Well, one, you have to have a position, right? If you can't have a choice unless you have a position. But again, this is where I think Republicans have an advantage if, in fact, there are competing agendas. This is a center-right country. The Republican Party is closer to where the sort of center of gravity of this country is than the Democrats are, as evidenced by the health care plan. But if you don't offer anything, right, then by default you're sort of letting the other side dominate the conversation. And I have to say, the idea of a choice would actually be my preference. I know the Democrats want to get away from making this a referendum on President Obama, given the performance so far. But also I would suggest from the Republican point of view, having a choice lets people understand why we're the right party in terms of being a center-right party, being closer to the American public. So we'll see who ends up being right on that one. But
all right, Dan Winston, thanks very much.